Welcome to today's conversation. I'm really looking forward to this. My career has always been one where there have always been lawyers close by, as I've followed my own journey with this topic area. So it's so great to be here with Caroline today to have this conversation at such an interesting time, as we have the Worker Protection Act coming in this Saturday. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. The format for today is Caroline and I are going to be in conversation together to start with, to kind of set the scene and share some of our thinking around everything that's happening at the moment. And then we will open up to questions near the end. And feel free to pop those questions in the chat as and when they occur to you. And then we will get round to those later on in the session. To start, just so you know who you're listening to today and who you're going to be asking questions of, just to say a little bit about both of us. So I'm Dr. Nina Burrowes. I'm the founder of the Consent Collective, and I'm a psychologist. I'm a psychologist that has, my whole career has been this topic area, and I've had a unique career path. I started my career working for the prison service, so working with people who are serving sentences for sexual offences. So as a psychologist, I kind of have that as part of my background. But since leaving the prison service, I've worked with rape crisis centres. We've been following this topic area wherever it goes. To start with, that was really mostly the criminal justice system. We're a pre-Me Too organisation. So back then, actually, if you wanted to do this work, the people who were interested in the skill set that we have were mostly police officers, judges, lawyers, barristers. So I've spent a lot of my career in those seas. But post Me Too, we started working with universities, thinking about consent on campus, thinking about changing culture on campus, but also helping non-criminal justice professionals respond to investigations on campus. If a student made a report, how would that be held? How would the interviews happen? And also thinking about wellbeing provision too. And now it is 2024, and a lot of the work we're doing is in workplaces. And so helping mostly HR teams think about how are they going to respond to the Worker Protection Act? What can they do to prevent sexual harassment from happening? And as somebody who cares very passionately about this topic area, I'm delighted to finally be having huge conversations about prevention instead of just responding to reports of complaints. So that's me. I'm going to hand over to Caroline to introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Caroline Prosser. I'm a partner at Hill Dickinson, and my specialty is employment law. So I've been advising all sorts of organisations, public sector, private sector, for 19 years. I've been qualified now. And as well as advising in all aspects of kind of equality and diversity, I have carried out investigations. So I carry out investigations in respect of equality and diversity. I also do them in terms of fraud, governance, all sorts. But I ended up doing quite a lot of investigations, particularly in respect of sexual harassment. So because the thing with sexual harassment is it's quite a complex and difficult area. It is a very legal area, very legal definitions, but it's also a very, very sensitive area. And that's why I'm so interested in working with Nina on this, because there's the other side to it, that, the other side that goes with the legal side. I've been brought in to carry out sexual harassment and assault investigations in lots of companies, organisations around the country, and I've also done it in universities where it's been student complaints about other students, so outside of the typical sort of employment sphere. And I've always worked with my clients to talk about sexual harassment, and a lot of the time to defend them in claims. And now it's really positive that we've got this preventative duty that's come in, because now it's all about how we can prevent these occurrences happening, as opposed to just picking up the pieces when things have gone wrong. So whilst I'll always be there to investigate when things have gone wrong, this is also about empowering you as employers to know what to do to prevent it getting to that point, and how to deal with them yourselves as well.
Fantastic. So, Caroline, you and I are quite busy at the moment, getting a lot of questions from the organizations we're working with. What are the most common questions you're getting asked from a kind of legal perspective at the moment when it comes to the Worker Protection Act?
Okay, so I'm getting asked by clients and organisations, what do I need to do now to prepare? And there's a number of things. You've got to look at your risk assessments, you've got to look at your policies, your engagement and your training, and we'll talk a bit more about those later. I'm also being asked, how do they know when they've taken these reasonable steps? Because the duty is you've got to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment occurring. So they're saying to me, what does reasonable steps look like? So again, something we're going to explore. And finally, one of the questions I'm getting is employers saying, well, we don't have a problem with this. Do we need to do anything? And my answer to that is obviously yes, because the law applies to everybody. So everybody's got to do something. But also there's that, if you think you haven't got a problem, that might suggest there is a problem, perhaps with a culture of non-reporting. So if somebody says to me, we haven't got a problem, that might in itself raise a few sort of flags to me that maybe we should look at their risk. What about you?
Yeah, a similar response when, organizations don't think they've got a problem. Although, in fairness, if they don't think they've got a problem there, or they don't see this as a priority, they're probably not quite engaged with us yet, because we're working with organizations who are like, how do we do this? We want to do this really well. What does that look like? I think a really common question we get asked is basically it's honoring the fact that this can feel like a scary topic area. It's really high risk. It's high stakes, or it feels like high stakes for everyone involved, the organization, anyone making a report, anyone accused, the people who are asked to hold that internally as well. So really, it's like, how can we reassure our leadership, our teams, and the people who work for us that we can do this in a way that's responsible and safe? And I guess for us, it's about recognizing that, yeah, this work needs to come from quite a grounded space. I think for too long, we haven't responded to sexual harassment. We've reacted to sexual harassment. It's come from a fear-based reaction kind of space. And to help people feel grounded and feel safe with what is a complex topic area, it's about doing the work in that way, recognizing that every organization is in the same boat. So yes, this is complex. Yes, this can feel big. Yes, every organization in the country is asking similar questions. And also we get sort of feedback as well in terms of, what helps people feel safe. I mean, we get feedback that if it feels really reassuring when you can actually connect with someone who's grounded in the topic area themselves and has been doing this for a while. So that's certainly been part of it. The other question we get asked a lot is, where do we start? Like, we want to do this, but what's a good way to start doing this? I think it's good to recognize that often this work is held by HR teams. I think we get into it later that actually it shouldn't just be held in HR. This is much bigger than human resources or people teams. However, it's often where the story starts when we're having a conversation with an organization. So how can you make that immediate team feel prepared for this, orientated to the topic area, and also a bit more equipped in terms of skills and knowledge? And then the other piece is a well-being conversation as well. If you're going to do something meaningful about sexual harassment in your workplace, if you're going to start training, if you're going to start conversations, then you need to think about what is your well-being provision, what are you going to be pointing people towards if they need some support after a training session. And of course, very closely related to that, recognizing that people have got lived experience of sexual harassment and related experiences. So again, what's the well-being provision like, and what resources can you plug in order to be able to start the work? So yeah, where do we start and how can we make it feel safe is often where we're pointed towards. But those are the questions we get asked. Caroline, do you have a sense of the questions organizations would like usefully be asking now? Like what's a really useful question to be asking in this moment?
The interesting thing is, you said, organisations are frightened and they think that it's a big onus, but let's be really clear about this. It has never been okay to sexually harass somebody, okay? So the law has always been there. And a lot of the people, a lot of the organisations we're talking to, certainly from my clients, they are good, nice employers. So they want a culture whereby people feel safe and secure. So whilst it seems a very big, onerous task, actually what we're doing is we're just making sure that we have got the steps in place to prevent it, because before, organisations didn't necessarily know how to go about preventing it. Now we've got this framework. So what I would be asking about in terms of what organisations should be asking, first of all, is what is my risk and how do we mitigate those risks? So an organisation needs to know what its risks are before it can even start with looking at policies and training. And when you look at risks, there's numerous different factors, and some risks will be cover a lot of sectors, and some risks are to do with particular types of work. So first of all, to know your risk, you have to look into your organisation. Better still, if you've got an employee engagement survey, or you can work with your employees or workers' council or the trade unions, because knowing what your risk is, to fully understand your risk, you might not be able to fully understand it unless you've actually engaged with these people to understand. But even if you're just looking at it yourselves, let's look at some common factors. So a risk factor could be remote working, working alone at night in isolated places. In COVID, interestingly, the reports of sexual harassment did not decrease. They just went online. So we've got more remote cases of sexual harassment. So remote working, and also because we have more remote working, sometimes when everyone was in the office, you could often pick up things, red flags of people's behaviour. But when people are remote, often those red flags are getting missed. Another big risk factor, which employers aren't always aware, is your the social aspect. So it's not just what carries on in the employment, it's the employee relationship is actually wider than just what goes on a day-to-day basis. So it would include when you're traveling to work, it would include business lunches, it would include school residentials, it would include Christmas parties, even if it's just within your staff. But also you've got to look at the impact of when you're with third parties as well, because every organisation is responsible for its employees, even if they are not on their own site, which can feel very difficult because, you know, you've only got a certain amount of control when it's off your site. So you've got to think about your employees who are on secondment. You have responsibility for those employees. The other thing that can be risk factors, if you've got a lack of diversity generally in your organisation. So if you have more of a set of people, one particular protected characteristic, sometimes inadvertently there can be a culture you know, I've come across it where there's been cultures in sort of very male-dominated areas where they haven't meant to, but there's been a culture of sort of putting posters up perhaps of images and things like that. So where you have a lack of diversity. And also another aspect can be power imbalances. So whilst actually, interestingly, the research shows that often sexual harassment is in workplaces that are actually more likely to be peer on peer as opposed to with somebody more senior and junior. Where you have got someone more senior and junior, that's going to be an aggravating factor because, of course, it's not just about the sexual harassment, it's also about the power. So, you know, are people making promises of job offers and things, or treating people differently because they've refused some advance? And so where we have a power imbalance, it's likely to be a lot more serious in terms of the aggravating factors. The other thing I would say about assessing your risks is what we spoke about at the beginning about not knowing you have a problem. So what's your record of complaints? So if you know you have had sexual harassment complaints in the past, then you know you have a risk. Okay, so that's the first starting point. Look back at what happened, look back at lessons learned. If you have no reports of sexual harassment, then your risk there is whether or not you've got a culture, whether people can't speak up or not. So I would say if nobody's ever reported it, have a look. If you have staff surveys, have you ever had someone say in a staff survey, oh, we don't say things because nothing ever gets done? Or even if they're referring to performance management or absence management, when they say management don't do things, that's a little bit of a hint that maybe it's hiding a little bit of a deeper problem with people speaking up. So once you've sort of looked at these risks, and if you can engage your staff or your representative body, the second thing that you employers most usefully need to be asking is, what can we do to mitigate these risks? So your risk factors, you absolutely, the EHRC are saying, you know, you can't even begin to look at mitigating risk factors unless you know what they are. So that's the first step. And when you're talking about mitigating risk factors, we need to look at putting things in place to make sure people are safe. So that's when we start looking about good policies, good procedures, good reporting lines. That's when we start to look about training our staff, training our managers who are dealing with the complaints, having proper reporting lines, anonymous perhaps reporting lines, and creating a culture whereby people can speak up and report. Are those the same types of questions you're being asked, Nina, from a psychologist?
Yeah, and I think I'm listening to you, and I think this is a really good example of the two professions coming together, because everything you've said about risk assessment, I'm like, yes, all of that, absolutely. But from my perspective as well, when I think about risk, I'm thinking about different types of sexual harassers and the different types of risk they present. So you have some people who are causing sexual harassment in the workplace and they have no intention to. So their behavior is coming from a lack of insight, a lack of self-reflection, a lack of knowledge, a key ingredient, a lack of feedback from anyone ever telling them that their behavior is not appropriate. And so that is a risk to mitigate that kind of unintended but still harmful sexual harassment that happens at volume, I would say, in workplaces. But then another risk to consider are those individuals who have every intention of causing harm and are hoping to manipulate their workplace culture, their workplace environment in order to get away with it. And that really speaks to often, the high profile cases we're aware of. Often there is a huge power imbalance there, because that is what gives the perpetrator the ability to manipulate the culture and to protect themselves, because they have power within that. So we need to be thinking about, how do we recognize and mitigate the full spectrum of risk when we're talking about these individuals within the workplace, whilst also being aware of all the reports we've got. I'm always thinking about the person we're never going to hear about, like the person who won't get reported. What can we be doing to feel like we're doing everything we can to address and be alive to that in the workplace as well, that kind of worst case scenario in terms of the type of individual. But when it comes to questions, like if I was running an organization now, or if I'd been asked to kind of hold this for an organization, I think a useful question to ask right now isn't necessarily, are we complying with this act? I think it's useful to recognize that the Worker Protection Act is just today's step in a journey we've been on for a long time. And that really a wise question to be asking right now is, how are we going to keep up with the pace of change? And the momentum for that change is coming from all sorts of directions. We've already got the the Employment Rights Bill going through. So already Labour are talking about this third party provision as well. So that already you can see the volumes being dialed up on this prevention business when it comes to third parties. But you've also got, we work with our university clients, you've got the next generation coming into your workforces, that they come with expectations around how they're going to be treated in the workplace. So how are you going to keep up with the pace of change? Because it is likely just to continue. I think another useful question is to recognize this isn't just for HR. Maybe HR are going to be the holders of this internally, although I think that might change. But actually, like asking, well, which areas of the business should be involved in this conversation and in this work? Because I mean, really, if you step back and look at it, this touches on everything. I mean, fundamentally, this is a health and safety conversation. We're talking about a workplace hazard. We're talking about the potential for psychological or physical harm in the workplace. So this is health and safety, it's compliance. Yes, it's well-being. Yes, it's diversity and inclusion. It's recruitment. It's retention. I think increasingly as well, it's going to be customer relations. It's going to be sales as well, because if you think we're getting to this stage where we need to have an assessment of effectively, what have you done as an organization to ensure that when we send our people to be in contact with your people, that is a safe environment. So some way of signaling we are achieving good practice when it comes to the prevention of sexual harassment here. And then also, like, ultimately the bottom line of any business is the value of the business. And so when we start to think of acquisitions and mergers and companies coming together, a very legitimate question to ask is, are we just about to buy a backlog of unresolved sexual harassment claims that are going to cost us a fortune and also present us with like this immediate reputational risk problem? So I think this is bigger than just HR, and it's useful to touch base with all of these different areas of an organization, including security as well. Like this is bigger than just HR. And then I guess there's the good news story. It's like another useful question to ask is, what are the benefits of doing this work? Like you said, it's like, what a wonderful thing to have workplaces where sexual harassment doesn't happen. And like what happens when we do this work well in terms of the culture we create, becoming an employer of choice, desires for gender equality, like, to make meaningful strides in terms of preventing sexual harassment is obviously going to help in the attraction and retention of talent in different industries which have been historically male dominated and are still today very male led. So there are a lot of rewards in this too. So yeah, I would be asking those kinds of questions, and I'd be getting excited about where this can go as well. um
I think one of the things I found really interesting when I was talking to you about this when we were working on this was your view on the predator, because I hadn't really thought about that. Because in the investigations that I've done, we've either had a predator who has gone into a certain role. This is where you talk about power imbalances with a view to exploiting those more vulnerable. So I've seen a lot of freelancers being targeted, disabled people being targeted, people who are more vulnerable, less likely to complain. So predators tend to know what they're doing. In terms of when you talk about unintentional, that's also correct. A lot of unintentional is just because people aren't educated, people don't understand. And I think looking at knowing sort of what age that we are, Nina, when we first started working, certainly when I did, the world was a very different place and things were a lot more accepted. Whereas now, fortunately, these kind of behaviours aren't accepted. And as you quite rightly say, these younger people coming out of university into the jobs aren't going to stand for this. So regardless of whether this law was in place or not, the movement of change, it is changing. So I think it is really important that even from a lawyer perspective, of course, we look at risk and we look at protecting our clients' exposure and things like that. Actually, our clients want a place where everybody wants to work and everyone feels valued. And, people coming into a workplace and people staying in a workplace, people actually don't leave because the number one reason people leave a job is because they don't feel loved. So if that's a basic, if you don't feel safe, that's an absolute minimum, isn't it?
oh, it's such a basic thing to ask the question, will I be safe when I go to work today? And it's at the heart, that's the question we're trying to help provide a much better answer to. Like, we're trying to create a workplace culture where you'll be safe. And so not just thinking about the hazards of fire or the risks associated with your job from a more traditional health and safety perspective, but wanting people to be entering an environment that is psychologically safe. And for me, psychologically safe, like doing this work well, doesn't mean this never happens here. It means that we are prepared, like, as and when these things arise, we are equipped to have sensible and responsible conversations. We can respond in a way that is in proportion to what's happened. If what's happened requires a quick conversation in the moment and then all parties can move on, then that's fantastic. If it needs to be escalated, if that's appropriate, then what happens. But that can only happen in an environment where people are equipped with the knowledge and the skills. And I feel like if we don't manage to equip people properly, that's when we can have this what we see, like overreactions, investigations happening when really it should have just been a conversation, calling out culture, and that can be, I mean, that is psychologically unsafe, to be terrified of getting it wrong every time you go to work. Like, that's not a nice working environment. So this environment where we feel like, no, I'm able to talk to my colleague about these things. And I guess the compassion we can access, because like the good news story being that we are trying to create workplace cultures where we can interact with each other's difference in a way that's really healthy for everyone. And so that includes ethnicity and disability and neurodiversity and gender identity. And it's like, we are all learning how to navigate that difference in a way that's good for everyone. We all need feedback from time to time. We can all get it wrong. So yeah, creating that environment is a really important part of this work. But I was wondering, Caroline, from a legal perspective, is there specific advice that people should be getting right now and thinking about Saturday and like, are we ready? Like, what should they be phoning you and asking you?
Absolutely. So just to say, you're quite right. We are never going to be able to stop predators or people who are going to. What we're trying to provide is a safe place for everybody, so that if it does happen, we've taken all the steps we can possibly take to demonstrate that we had done as much as we could to prevent it. So when we say we take a zero tolerance approach to it, what we mean is we're not saying we can never stop it happening. That's impossible. What we're saying is we take a zero tolerance approach so that when it does happen, this is how we behave. And I think when you're talking about, when we mention predator and intentional, the one thing we need to do with these steps I'm going to talk you through is that the unintentional, accidental sexual harassment should be easy to change. That's about culture. So if we can change the culture and we can get a speak up culture, like you say, it doesn't have to launch straight into investigation. What the ideal is to get people just feeling that they can call it out. That would be your ideal dream scenario. So how do you get to that? You know, because some people are quite far away from that. So first of all, this is really good that we've got this act in place, because it gives us the impetus to do something, and we have to do something. And it also shows our employees that we mean what we say and we're buying into this. It's very important for your employees to know that you think it's important. So first of all, I'll say assess your risks. Now, if you don't know how to assess your risks, I've done for my clients like a RAG report. So I've asked them, I've got a series of questions that I send to them. They just fill in the questions about what they've got in place or etc. And then I produce a RAG report to show them where their risks are. So that's the first thing. If you haven't done that, get onto that. The second thing is your robust policy. You've absolutely got to have a robust policy. And a lot of people, all my clients will have equality and diversity policies, and you can put it in that, but I would recommend you have it separately for two reasons. One is because it's to show that its importance on its own. It is the only one at the moment with a preventative duty. And secondly, to include all the things in the policy that the EHRC want you to include. It makes it quite a long policy. So if you're putting it in another policy, it can be quite difficult to read. So the EHRC listed 9 things they wanted in their policy. So when I drafted policies for my clients, I ensured all those 9 things were in. And obviously they want to bespoke them, because you can use the policy, you can address the complaints through your grievance system, you can have a separate system. Some of my big PLCs, they have separate reporting lines. Some of my smaller, say, theatre companies, they obviously don't have the capacity for that. So we work with them to put in place what works for them, because whilst the duty is for everybody, there is also a recognition that some organisations have more capacity than others. So the same goes for training. So the next thing is, so they say there's no point having a policy if you don't communicate this and train it to your staff. It doesn't count. If you have a policy, that's the bare minimum. But you've got to train your staff in knowing how to report. First of all, staff have got to know what sexual harassment is, because some of it's really obvious and some of it isn't obvious. You know, some staff don't realise that messages on WhatsApp outside of work count. Some staff don't realise that if it's unintentional, for example, if there's no intended victim, like I mentioned before about putting the calendar, the topless calendar on the wall, there wasn't an intended victim there, but it created a culture which somebody could complain about. Now, there's a lot of aspects of sexual harassment, and it's too much to sort of go through today, that are a little bit more subtle than the obvious. You know, commenting about people's appearance, for example, or even telling somebody about your sex life, you know, that could count as sexual harassment. So there's a big sort of, in the policy, you need to set it up. You really need to train all your staff. So all of your staff have to be trained, and your managers. So to take them separately, your staff need to know. The EHRC listed everything that they want in your staff training, which is about telling them what sexual harassment is. It's also about how they should be able to report it, what should happen if they report it, what protection they get as a witness, how the company or organisation will deal with their complaint. And because I realised it's quite an onerous thing for employers, particularly a lot of my clients have got employees all over the country. So what I did is I produced a 30-minute video which covers all the aspects you need for the staff. And you can show the staff the video, and then there's a little workbook after, because you have to show that they've engaged in it. So there's a little workbook, and it can go on your iLearn platform, and all the staff can do that. And that's your staff. And then you've got to look at your managers, because you've got to look at what you actually do when you receive a complaint. So there's 2 types of manager, one that will be dealing with the complaint and one that won't. The ones that won't still have to have a knowledge of, because they set the culture. So they have to have a greater knowledge about how we're going to manage the complaints, but your investigating managers need to have a specific skill set in dealing with the complaints themselves. So what we've been recommending is that you gather your small team of people who are going to be specifically trained in how to deal with sexual harassment. So you will have people in your organisation who handle your grievances, your disciplinaries. We say, if you can, gather your best, because sexual harassment itself is a technical area. So you are not going to be able to decide if there's been harassment if you don't know what the definition of harassment is, because as well as all the other aspects of it, it is a legal test. Harassment, it is. So it's same with equality and diversity. You cannot say there's been indirect discrimination if you don't know what direct discrimination looks like. So your core team need to be properly trained on not only the law behind it, but also, and this is where I'm sure you'll have more input in this, Nina, but how they actually do it, because sexual harassment is a very difficult area. When I'm doing sexual harassment, sexual assault investigations, I'm asking some very, very sensitive and difficult questions. And it's about how your managers are able to ask those questions, but also how do you deal with it on a day-to-day basis when you're asking potentially people to be witnesses against their own peers. You know, I have many, many cases where we're asking somebody to give evidence against friends or against their own boss. How does a manager deal with it? How do they make the witness feel comfortable to be able to give that? And it's about explaining what you do with their evidence and making them understand that they're protected. And, you know, it's all very well saying, you know, you have protection. If you're a witness in an investigation, you always have legal protection. You cannot be treated to a detriment for taking part in an investigation. But that's saying that and feeling that as a witness are two different things. And your investigations team not only have to be trained how to do the investigation, but also how to deal with the people side. And before you sort of look at the people side, I would just sort of say on the investigation side, there's a lot of very, very specific things, particularly with sexual harassment. So, for example, often it's one person's word against another. So how do you weigh and assess the evidence? Your managers need to be trained on how to assess evidence when it's one person's word against another. You know, it isn't necessarily one of those where you've got lots of, you might, if you're lucky, have, you know, documentary evidence, WhatsApps, emails, but a lot of the time it is two people in person. You know, a lot of the time that I've dealt with sexual harassment and assault investigations, the two people might have started off in a relationship. So you can get a situation where it was consensual and then it became non-consensual. And that's very tricky for untrained managers to be able to assess where the line drew and where it became non-consensual. So there's an element of training all your staff, and that's fine. You know, you can do that by the video or any kind of iLearn platform. But when you're coming to look at your actual managers, you need to specifically train them. And what do you do when you have the complaint?
Yeah, I think you've done a great job of just highlighting, like, when you get into the work, like, this is complex terrain. And I feel like one of the best things people could maybe take from conversations like this is to recognize that at some point the level of skill that we're asking people to have, that needs some time and some investment and some reassurance as well. So, like, we provide that kind of human side of the training when it comes to how do you interview people, but not just that, how do you manage the case, how do you manage your own boundaries, conflict resolution. Like, that is such a human story, and being able to do the human bit really well, having those skills in house, that's not only going to reassure you that when you come to a decision, you've come to a decision that's based on something that's quite solid, because you've done a great job of those interviews, but also it's about keeping that culture intact and maintaining those messages of, we can be responsible here about this really difficult topic area. And there is so much psychology. Like, I would say that in the main, you're talking about individuals who don't realize that they've caused harm. And so you've got all of that defensiveness, and like, there's so much to this. And so if you want to do something meaningful, I think it's really useful to understand that the work isn't going to be PowerPoint slides and just, this is the law. And these are some behaviors. The meaningful work is going to be an investment in your people, an investment in their interpersonal skills, so that they are more equipped to have what might feel like vulnerable conversations in terms of giving feedback to a colleague, vulnerable conversations in terms of receiving feedback. That is a skill, to be able to receive feedback. And this is all interpersonal skills with consent being at the heart of it as well. So, for those unintended moments of sexual harassment, helping people understand how consent works, and that you're not a mind reader, that you can be skillful when it comes to consent, and when you get it wrong, you've been unskillful. So yeah, I think understanding that if you don't invest in skills and you just do a information-based training, you're going to create an environment. You're going to be saying to people, we can, let us know if this happens. But if you do that, if people feel unskilled, they are just going to escalate it. They're going to escalate it to their manager. If the manager doesn't feel skilled, they're going to escalate it to HR. If HR don't feel skilled enough, you're going to be commissioning an independent. You're going to be calling Caroline in to do an investigation.
Yeah, and ideally you want to be doing it yourself. And I think
Yeah,
investing, when you talk about investing, so what you're talking about really important is supporting your managers in being able to do these very difficult investigations. But once you support your managers and you deal with things properly, that in itself shows that you are preventing sexual harassment, because you're demonstrating to your employees that when it arises, you deal with it properly. So in a lot of places, it's not a day one thing. We can come in on day one with our policy and our rollout, but essentially the proof is in the pudding when we show that we take it seriously. So in investigations I've done have been in areas where they've never had it investigated before. So they've brought me in and it showed the employees that yes, this is being dealt with. And hopefully once I've come in and I've done those investigations, in the future they trust their employer, and then in future they might be able to do them themselves. So it's about demonstrating to employees that you take these seriously, and there's no point having all the policies and training in the world if when it hits the training your managers aren't equipped to then do a proper job. And then you can have a reporting back in a GDPR compliant way as to how you've actually addressed these, because you've got to tell your employees what you've done as well to manage it. But looking at sort of, I've talked about the sort of league tab, but I want to know, so what meaningful changes do you think they can do to prevent sexual harassment now, Nina, in terms of a more psychological side?
I think that skills thing, I think a key thing to think about is how you frame this whole moment, and you frame any training or any intervention in this. I think if it feels like, oh, another thing I have to do, or if it feels like it's coming from quite a moralistic place, if it doesn't feel like it's a genuine investment, that you're thinking about all of the different audiences when you do work on this. So you're thinking about the people who need some feedback about their behavior. You're trying to help them meet modern expectations of how they treat people in the workforce. So it's an investment, but you kind of need to be the way you do it. You need to think about all those different audiences, including people who already have lived experience, and that's a wide spectrum of individuals. But anything that you do, it needs to speak to them, so people feel like they've been heard, that they feel safe with the tone, not just the content of any training. And I think if you get the tone right, if it doesn't feel like a telling off, and it doesn't feel too superficial and therefore not really the real thing, I think that it's one of those things where you kind of need to walk the talk, and the training needs to feel like it is it. I'm conscious of time, and I feel like we should get to some of the questions. So Cynthia, I wonder if you could let us know if we have some, and if you've got any questions, if you could pop those in the chat, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and just an invitation for anyone to keep adding questions, please. And we've got a two-part question here. I think the 9-point EHRC list is quite overwhelming for the average employer, and how do we prevent this becoming an industry of work which puts a lot of employers off, is part one of that question. And then part two is, what's the most important area of these 9 points from EHRC, do you think? And what is the prediction of what they will look at most?
So I raised that, didn't I, the 9 points? So I think I should answer that. Now, what I want to be really clear is that I have got some lovely, lovely clients who still aren't up to speed with the sexual harassment. I don't want people, this is a journey we're going on, okay? Even I've got clients who have really bought into this from a long time ago, and they're really pushing this. And I've got clients who are just starting to look at it. So the most important thing is that we start to look at things. A lot of people will be nice employers, okay? So try not to think of it as too onerous. It's just about putting things in place that, that you want to put in place, because when we're talking about what the EHRC are asking in these 9 points I referred to are things that they want to see in your policy. So each of them are important. It's about who the policy applies to, what you're going to do when you get a complaint, how you're going to report it back. But it's a set of levers. The whole preventative duty isn't just one thing. It's about putting in place a culture, and your culture starts, it could start now. If you've never sort of built on this before, it starts now with your rollout. Engagement with staff. Here is our policy. This is the training you're all going to get. This is the training our managers are going to get. And then, you know, in 6 months' time, make sure you put out another comms. Make sure it's part of the conversation. It's never too late to start. So try not to see it as something a bit more in it. Because, like I say, sexual harassment's never been allowed. Okay, so it's not. We're not asking. We're not asking something that's too far away from a place where we'd all like to be anyway. And if you've got somebody to support you, so you know, you want to train managers, use people to train them, get the advice. You know, it's absolutely, for my clients, I said to them back in April, this is coming in. This is what you need to do. And by the way, here it is. Here's your policy. Here's some training. You know, look to support. You don't have to do this by yourselves.
And I think that is a key message as well, like that it isn't something you have to be doing on your own. So one of the ways in which we're supporting organizations with this and with meeting those requirements is we have a membership and accreditation scheme that we're going to be opening next month. So this would be a way of doing a number of things, partly not being alone, so being connected with other organizations who are on the same journey, partly having a framework and some reassurance that yes, you are managing to meet the standard and keep up with that pace of change. Obviously, some support and some training and some resource in there as well, but also a way of communicating internally and externally. I think there is a job for celebration in all of this. Like this ultimately, all of this is a good news story, and so we want to also create a space where we can not just be driving good practice and supporting people with that, but we should celebrate this. I mean, as an activist in the space, this is a moment to celebrate. This is a moment of potentially really important change. I'm like professionally and personally really excited at the prospect of helping industries become places where sexual harassment is the anomaly that it should be, the rarity, and not part of the culture, not this thing that's kind of hidden in plain sight. And so yeah, there's lots to celebrate here, as well as having, you know, recognizing the complexity as well.
And we have another question as well. Do you have an example risk assessments from this perspective, just as a starting point? I've looked online and it doesn't seem to be something that's out there, which I recognize could just be because organizations and their risks are all different.
Yeah, so what I'd say with risk assessment is, you're right, the risk assessments are different sector specific. So there are certain sectors which are known to be higher risk, and there's certain sectors which have specific guidance. For example, in orchestras, the specific EHRC sexual harassment guidance for orchestras. I work in a lot of different sectors, including education. I can tell you what the risks are there. I can tell you there's different risks in manufacturing. So when you're putting your risk assessment together, first of all, you assess what your risks is, whether you fill in sort of questions and your risk assessment is produced for you. What I did was I broke down all of the risk factors for my clients on a template risk assessment, and it asks them the questions so that when they ask the questions, they can fill in their risk. And then from my sector specific knowledge, I can guide them, in your sector, this is a particular risk. So hotels and restaurants, you have a particular risk where there's third party customers, where there's any kind of alcohol involved, where you've got sort of performing arts industries, you have more of a risk if you have freelancers. So when it comes to risk assessments, yes, I don't believe I don't know what's online, but I would say, yes, they are very specific, but get somebody to support you with it. It's about asking the right questions for you to be able to then put together your risk assessment.
And this is definitely a moment for industry bodies to step in and support those conversations where you are considering the particular nature of risk in your industry, because it is the creative arts, or, you know, because of where you recruit from, where people have to go to do their work. You know, if you work in an industry where typically people are entering people's private homes every day in order to go about their job, that is a particular kind of risk that is industry wide. And so I feel like this is a moment for those industry bodies to coordinate and to facilitate those conversations. And then you can think about your particular risks as an organization. And then we can also start to think about the particular risks in terms of, you know, the people who are causing harm and how that fits into everything as well. Definitely.
That's great. We've got another question in higher education context. I wondered if you had any thoughts about the interplay between how to address SVH risk posed to or by both staff and student groups.
Yeah. Do you want to take this
So
first?
Yeah, both of us work with higher education clients. I'm just, at the moment, I really feel like this is a moment because in higher education, you've also got the Office for Students, E6 requirements as well. So you have these two kind of requirements coming in at exactly the same time. And I think it'd be very wise to coordinate on that, just from a resource perspective, but it's the same piece of work. And both of them are saying prevent sexual harassment. One more from an employer point of view, and one thinking about your student population as well as the interplay with your staff. So I feel like it is such a moment to bring those two things together. Are we seeing that? I would say not massively. I feel like you've probably got two different teams. I suspect the HR team are focused on the Worker Protection Act, and then your student services team are focused on the Office for Students, and they are duplicating each other's work to a degree. And I feel like there's so much to gain, not only from bringing them together, but the future of this work has to be helping students prepare for the workplace with an understanding that workplaces, they're going to be having this conversation there too. And so this needs to become part of how we are educating the next generation, because employers want people with those interpersonal skills that we've both been talking about, the giving and receiving of feedback, the ability to have vulnerable conversations, the insight, the willingness to reflect on your own behavior, to not be broken and not be able to not hold the fact that maybe you got something wrong, to be like, oh yeah, I got that wrong. I can take responsibility for it. I can see it. I can, you know, now have a conversation about, well, what can I do to make amends and what do I need to learn from this experience? We need all of that in our universities, please.
Yeah, I think my experience is that when I've done sexual harassment between students, it's been dealt with by student services. And when I've done it with work, it's been dealt with by HR. And the law is the same. Like I say, the law against sexual harassment is the same for everyone. Particularly, though, I would say the differences I find is just the types of sexual harassment assault, because with students, you've often got a lot more case of some consensual activities, some non-consensual. You've got a lot of friendship groups. It's a lot more nuanced. It's not as I found you're dealing with younger people, more vulnerable people sometimes. So in terms of how it works on a practical level, the law's the same and we have to have the same steps in place. But I would say when you're dealing with students, you need a particular set of skilled investigators in there, because you are dealing with young people. You are dealing with much more complicated scenarios where there is that absolute mix on and off campus. So we talk about workers. It counts in the workplace and it also counts at Christmas parties. But with students, we're talking about people who might live together, people who've been going out together, and behaviours where perhaps there's a level of a lack of understanding or lack of maturity in some places. You know, there's a different levels of student experience and depending on their own background. So I would say that the universities need to work together to create the culture. But in terms of when you're dealing with them, there is even more importance on the sort of specific, and I would at that point be wanting to speak to someone like you, Nina, to say, how do I deal with vulnerable young people? How do I absolutely ask these very personal and very difficult questions to these young people? So yeah, I would say that would be my main sort of thoughts on the university aspect.
Yeah, and then who's making a decision about this case, and are they then equipped to hear, you know, those testimonies and that evidence in a way that avoids all the myths and misconceptions that are everywhere in this space? Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm conscious we've only got 8 minutes to do it in, so I'm wondering if we can, before we kind of close and give people the opportunity to, you know, point to some resources and those kinds of things, if we can look to the future and think about maybe where is this work going? Like, Caroline, if we do this webinar in 4 years' time, what will be the kinds of things that hopefully we're talking about?
Okay, so we would be saying, do you remember when we did that webinar? That was the start of it, and it's going to go much bigger. So we know the Employment Right Bill came out on Thursday. It's a very exciting time for lawyers. Don't worry, we're there to guide our clients through this. But they are bringing back third-party harassment. So third-party harassment, not just in terms of sexual harassment. We're talking about all types of third-party harassment, racial, disability, everything. So we've got to start looking at that. So what we are doing now, the pace of change, is that this is the only one where there's preventative duty now for sexual harassment, but now they're bringing back third-party harassment for all different types of discrimination. We need to be looking at protecting our staff from third-party harassment, and eventually we're going to start seeing preventative duties come in there. We're also getting, if you've seen with the new Labour plans, there's going to be a much more rights for unions and access to unions and work councils. We're going to see Fair Work Agency. We're going to see a lot more bodies representative of either representative employees' rights or being able to take action on behalf of employees. So the Fair Works Agency is going to be coming in looking at things like, are people paid properly for the holidays, all sorts. But so bit by bit, we're not just in a situation where if an employee is aggrieved, they're going to have to bring a tribunal claim to get recompense. We're looking at actual bodies being enabled to go in and investigate. The EHRC can go in and investigate an organisation even without a complaint of sexual harassment. I don't know if anybody knows that, but they have the ability to go in. And if they do go in, like they did to Sainsbury's, they can create a Section 23 agreement to say what they want the organisation to do. And it's a public agreement. And that doesn't require anybody to have either brought a complaint or a tribunal. So what we're seeing is, from a legal perspective, is that this is the movement of change and this is the start. So it's only going to get more. So we want to start putting things in place now and creating that culture and that right workplace. So as the different changes come in, it's not going to be too onerous as they come in.
I can feel your excitement.
We're always excited when there's changes of laws, employment lawyers.
Yeah, no, you're getting it's like adjusting to this new reality. And I think the new reality we're also adjusting to, from like thinking from this, like the truth is this is all about skills and interpersonal skills. This is happening as artificial intelligence is also gathering momentum and volume. So like the kind of future stuff that I can see happening is that emotional intelligence as a skill set is going to become the thing that the employers are recruiting for, the person who can diffuse situations rather than escalate them, the person who's able to receive feedback, manage these vulnerable conversations. They're going to become such an asset in the workplace. I feel like employers are going to be looking for talent that exude emotional intelligence. And so this really dovetails with that because it's the same thing. So I'm really looking forward to our education institutions getting their heads around that and recognizing that is what the workforce of tomorrow needs to have. And I'm really looking forward to understanding that, when you talk about managers, like this is such an important part of the skill set. So when our university work and our workplace work comes together, that's the stuff that we can anticipate and we can look forward to. Caroline, if people want to get in touch with you after today, what can they do? And what do you hope that some of the sort of key takeaway messages might be from this session as well?
So my key messages, first of all, is please don't panic. Wherever you are at your journey, we can start it, okay? And you don't have to do this alone. There is, we look at it in terms of your capacity as well, because I can see people probably sitting here thinking, how do I do this? I'm a small employer. There are options and there are steps that we can be taken at all different types of employment, at all different types of organisation. So firstly, I would say assess your risk, very importantly. get your policies in place, get your training sorted, start engaging and communicating with your staff. My details are in the chat. There's my mobile number in there. There's my email address. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you need any support, or if you want the video that I've produced so you can just roll it out to all your staff, it's a very low price we charge for it, and you can roll out to as many staff as you like, and that will cover off your staff if you haven't yet got round to thinking about how you're going to train all your staff. So anything like that or any other support, just contact me.
And for my part, in terms of takeaways, I hope my wish is that people have a sense that actually what the work needs now is this grounded response. So I'd really like encourage you to kind of like seek the wisdom in the next steps. I think that will serve you well. I think getting into beyond the information, and this is what sexual harassment is, equipping people with the interpersonal skills. Because people can disclose to anybody in the workplace. They're not necessarily going to go to well-being or your mental health first aiders. So we need everybody in the workplace to be equipped to hear that disclosure. We need everybody in the workplace to be an active bystander and have the skills to step in appropriately to things that they might witness. So yeah, that kind of grounded approach that is going to serve you well, and also in a way future-proof this work as well. Like those skills are what we need for any difference, any different power dynamic as well. It's the same set of interpersonal skills. So I hope that message came through clearly. In terms of how we can support you with next steps, we have our membership and accreditation scheme launching. We have ready to go if you wanted to do something immediately. We've got our online active bystander course, so equipping people with the skill set, the understanding and the skills in order to do this work. I'm going to ask Cynthia to put a link in the chat. We've got this really handy survey that you can do. I think you answer about 33 questions, and it will go through all of the different areas of the Worker Protection Act, and you'll be able to see how ready your organization is and which are the areas where you might have gaps. So that will be coming at you in the chat. We have another webinar on November the 7th. That's going to have more of a business leader and well-being lens on it. We're doing that with Super Wellness. So if you want to sign up for that, we'll make sure we get all of that information to you after today, as well as a link to the recording of this webinar in case you want to share that with any colleagues. I'm just going to say thank you so much to Caroline. And thank you all of you for attending. Thanks to Cynthia for holding the space.